the sacred stone. I'm Alex, and I live in a small town nestled at the base of the mountains. It's pretty peaceful here most of the time, except for the whole sacred stone thing. My town is like something out of a postcard, with its quaint streets lined with old-fashioned buildings and towering trees. The main street is filled with charming shops and cosy cafes, and there's a sense of community that you don't find in big cities. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, and gossip spreads like wildfire. But beyond the town limits lies the real mystery: the mountains. They loom over us, their peaks shrouded in mist, and their dense forests are a maze of shadows and secrets. The mountains are wild and untamed, with rugged cliffs and deep, dark valleys that seem to swallow up the light. It's easy to get lost in those woods, and many who wander in never find their way out again. The area surrounding my town is a mix of rolling hills, lush forests and rocky outcroppings. There are rivers that snake through the landscape, their waters clear and cold, and there are meadows filled with wildflowers that bloom in a riot of colour. But despite its beauty, there's an air of foreboding about the place, especially if you venture into the mountains. The mountains are said to be haunted, with all manner of strange creatures and spirits lurking in the shadows. There are stories of people who have seen mysterious lights dancing amongst the trees at night, or heard eerie whispers on the wind. Some say that the mountains are alive, and that they watch over the town like ancient guardians. But the most chilling tale of all is the legend of the sacred stone. It's said that the stone was placed in the mountains long ago by the town's founders, and that it holds great power. Every year, on the summer solstice, the town's high school seniors are sent into the mountains to retrieve the stone and bring it back before sunrise. If they fail, it's said that a terrible tragedy will befall the town. No one knows exactly what awaits the students in the mountains, but many believe that the stone is guarded by something malevolent. Some say it's a spirit that takes the form of a great beast, while others believe it's a curse that drives people mad. Whatever it is, no one who has ever gone in search of the stone, except during the summer solstice, has returned to tell the tale. Despite the dangers, every year a group of brave, or foolish, students sets out into the mountains in search of the sacred stone. They form small groups, armed with flashlights and backpacks, and they disappear into the woods, their fate uncertain. Some return with the stone, triumphant and relieved, while others are never seen again, their fate a mystery lost to the shadows of the mountains. The adults in town remain tight-lipped about what lies in the mountains. They refuse to speak of the tragedies that have befallen those who have gone in search of the stone, and they warn the students to stay away, except during ritual time. Bringing back the sacred stone is a huge deal in my town, especially for us high school seniors. It's not just about proving our bravery or facing our fears. It's about securing our future. You see, a student, or group of students, who manage to retrieve the stone before sunrise on the summer solstice are rewarded with college scholarships and a hefty sum of money. The scholarships are a big deal, because many of us come from families that can't afford to send us to college without financial assistance. Winning one of these scholarships could mean the difference between going to college or staying in town and working at the local factory, or trying to stick it out at one of the local shops. And then there's the money. The reward for bringing back the stone is enough to set us up for life, or at least give us a very good start. It's a tempting offer, especially for those who come from less fortunate backgrounds. Every year, as the summer solstice approaches, the excitement in town builds. There are whispers and rumours about who will attempt the journey into the mountains, and who might have what it takes to bring back the stone. The local paper even runs a special feature on the students who have volunteered, speculating on their chances and their motivations. But despite the allure of the rewards, not everyone is willing to take the risk. Many students are too afraid of what might await them in the mountains, and they choose to stay behind, watching from the safety of their homes as their classmates set out on their perilous journey. For those of us who do venture into the mountains, the rewards are well worth the risk. We spend weeks planning our route, studying maps, and consulting with those who have gone before us. Though those who have made the journey are always, shall we say, less than helpful. They talk about dangers, but never specify. They warn about separating or leaving the trails, but never say why. And if you ask point blank what is out there, many adults will fix you with a blank and angry stare, and then simply walk away. I was young, dumb, and fueled by ambition the summer of my senior year. If only I had known. The week leading up to the summer solstice is always pretty tense in town. There's an air of anticipation and excitement, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. Everyone knows what's coming. The ritual, the journey into the mountains, the quest for the sacred stone, and everyone is on edge, wondering who will volunteer and who will stay behind. For me and my two friends, Maya and Jake, the decision to volunteer was both thrilling and terrifying. We had talked about it for weeks, weighing the risks and rewards, and finally, on the last day to sign up, we made our decision. It wasn't an easy choice. None of us were particularly brave or adventurous. Well, except for Maya. And the thought of venturing into the mountains filled us with dread. But the allure of the scholarships and the money was too strong to resist. And we knew that this was our chance to secure our futures. Maya is one of my closest friends, and she always has been the adventurous type. She's fearless, with a spirit that can't be tamed, and she's always up for a challenge. When we first heard about the ritual and the rewards that came with it, Maya was the first of us to volunteer. For Maya, the decision to join the ritual was a no-brainer. She saw it as an opportunity for adventure, a chance to prove herself and test her limits. She'd always been drawn to the unknown, to the mysteries of the world, and the idea of venturing into the mountains and facing whatever lay in wait excited her. But it wasn't just about adventure for Maya. Like me and Jake, Maya comes from a humble background, and the scholarships and money offered as rewards for completing the ritual were a huge draw for her. She saw it as a way to escape the confines of her small town and see the world. But more than anything, I think, Maya joined the ritual because she believed in the power of the stone. She's always been a bit of a dreamer, a believer in magic and the supernatural, and she saw the ritual as a chance to be part of something bigger than herself, to tap into the ancient power of the stone and bring it back to our town. Jake, on the other hand, Jake is the kind of guy who always has a smile on his face, no matter what life throws at him. He's easygoing, with a laid-back attitude that makes him popular with, well, everyone. But beneath the easy exterior lies a deep-seated need to escape, to break free from the constraints of our town and his family. Jake's family is one of the oldest in town, with deep roots and a long history. But despite their standing in the community, Jake has always felt like an outsider. His father is a strict man, with rigid ideas of how Jake should live his life. He wanted Jake to follow in his footsteps, to take over the family business and carry on the family name. But Jake had other ideas. He'd always been drawn to the arts, to music and literature, and he dreamed of leaving our town and pursuing a career in the city. He's a talented musician, with a gift for writing songs that touch the soul, and he longs to share his music with the world. For Jake, the decision to join the ritual was about more than just the scholarships and the money, although those were certainly factors. It was about breaking free from his father's expectations, about proving to himself and everyone else that he was capable of forging his own path. Jake joined the ritual because he needed to escape. He needed to leave our town behind, to explore the world and find his own place in it. He saw the ritual as a chance to start fresh, to leave his old life behind and embrace a new future, one filled with possibilities. As for me, well, I'm the kind of person who has always felt a bit out of place in our town. I've never quite fit in with the others, except for Jake and Maya. I don't know why, but I've always felt like I was destined for something more. But growing up with a single mother who worked long hours to make ends meet, I knew that my dreams of leaving our town and going to college were just that. Dreams. My mother is the strongest person I know. She raised me on her own, working multiple jobs to put food on the table and keep a roof over our heads. She's always encouraged me to chase my dreams, to never give up on myself. But I could see the worry in her eyes, the fear that she wouldn't be able to give me the opportunities she wanted me to have. For me, joining the ritual was a chance to change my fate, to secure a future for myself that didn't involve working in the same factory or store that so many in our town were resigned to. The scholarships and the money were a lifeline, a way for me to escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped my family for generations. But more than that, joining the ritual was a way for me to prove myself, and to my mother, that I was capable of achieving something great, of overcoming the odds and making something of myself. I knew that without the money from the ritual, I would never be able to afford to go to college, and I was determined not to let that opportunity slip through my fingers. So, with trembling hands and nervous smiles, we signed our names on the volunteer list, joining the ranks of those who would attempt the ritual. It was a momentous decision, one that would change our lives forever. After Jake, Maya, and I signed up for the ritual, the whole school seemed to buzz with excitement and anticipation. We knew that we had embarked on a dangerous journey, but we were determined to see it through, driven by the promises of scholarships and a better future. A few days before the summer solstice, we were called to a special assembly in the cafeteria, along with the other students who would be participating in the ritual. The atmosphere was tense as we filed into the room, our hearts pounding. The sheriff and the principal stood at the front of the room, and as they began their presentation, a hush fell over the crowd. They explained the history of the ritual, how it had been passed down through generations as a way to protect our town from harm. They told us about the sacred stone and how it was said to hold great power and protection. But they also warned us of the dangers that await us in the mountains. They spoke of the treacherous terrain, the wild animals, and the mysterious forces that were said to dwell in the shadows. They told us that many students had ventured into the mountains over the years, but few had returned, and those who did were changed forever. Despite the risks, the sheriff and the principal encouraged us to be brave, to work together, and to trust in each other. They told us of the rewards for completing the ritual, but the true reward was knowing that we had done something courageous and noble for our whole town. After the assembly, Maya, Jake and I hung out after school, discussing the upcoming ritual and what lay ahead. We sat in our favourite spot by the river, the water rushing past us, the sun setting in the distance, casting a golden glow over everything. As we talked, I couldn't help but notice how tense Jake seemed. He kept fidgeting with a rock, his eyes darting around nervously. Maya and I exchanged a glance, sensing that there was something on his mind. "Hey, Jake, is everything okay?" Maya asked, her voice soft and gentle. Jake looked up, his eyes meeting ours. Yeah, I'm fine," he said, but his voice was tight, strained. "Come on, Jake, you can tell us," I said, nudging him gently. "We're all in this together, right?" Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just my family," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They're really old in town, you know? Like, they've been here forever. I couldn't help but feel like they must know something about what's up in the mountains." Maya and I exchanged another glance, this time with a hint of excitement. If Jake's family did know something, it could give us an edge, a clue to help us succeed in our quest. "Jake, that's amazing!" Maya exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "You have to ask them. Maybe they have a map, or some old stories, or something that could help us." But Jake shook his head, his expression darkening. No, you don't understand," he said, his voice low. "I've asked them before, and they've always been evasive. They never talk about it, never give me any details. I don't think they want me to know." Maya and I were silent, absorbing this information. It was frustrating, knowing that Jake's family might hold the key to our success, but also knowing that Jake had hit a dead end in his search for answers. "I'm sorry, guys," Jake said, his voice filled with regret. "I wish I could help more, but I really don't know anything. We're going into this blind, just like everyone else." And with that, the conversation shifted, our focus turning to the challenges that lay ahead, and the need to prepare ourselves mentally and physically for the journey into the mountains. But in the back of our minds, there was always that nagging sensation. What secrets did Jake's family hold? And would they be the key to our success, or our downfall? The night was warm and still when I got home, and I had drifted off to sleep with thoughts of the ritual swirling in my mind. But suddenly, I was jolted awake by the sound of pebbles hitting my window. I sat up, my heart pounding, wondering what could be making that noise at this hour. I crept to the window and peered out, my eyes widening in surprise when I saw Jake standing in the front yard, looking up at me. Without hesitation, I opened the window and he climbed in, his face serious and determined. "Jake? What are you doing here?" I whispered, trying not to wake my mother in the other room. "I couldn't sleep," Jake said. "I've been thinking about what you and Maya said earlier, about my family maybe knowing something, so I talked to my father." I could see the conflict in Jake's eyes, the fear and uncertainty warring with his determination to find answers. I knew how hard it must have been for him to confront his father, to push for information that he knew might not be freely given. "And what did he say?" I asked, my heart racing with anticipation. Jake hesitated, taking a deep breath before speaking. "He didn't tell me much," he admitted, "but he did say that there are things in the mountains. Things that we can't understand, that have been there long before us. He said that this ritual is a way to appease them, to keep them from causing harm." I felt a chill run down my spine at Jake's words. The idea that there were mysterious forces at work in the mountains, forces that had been there long before us, filled me with a sense of dread and wonder. "But why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why do we have to do this?" Jake shook his head, his expression grim. He wouldn't say. The conversation with Jake that night was intense, filled with revelations that sent shivers down my spine. As he sat at the edge of the bed, Jake recounted his confrontation with his father, his words echoing in the stillness of the night. "He was furious," Jake said, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. "He couldn't believe that I even considered participating in the ritual. He said it was foolish, dangerous, that I was putting myself and our family at risk." I could see the pain in Jake's eyes, the conflict between his desire to escape his father's control and his need for his father's approval. It was a struggle that I knew all too well, having experienced it with my own mother. "But I stood my ground," Jake continued, his voice growing stronger. "I told him that I needed to do this, that I needed to find out the truth about the mountains and the ritual. And when he wouldn't listen, and when he refused to understand, I left." I was stunned. Jake had always been the peacekeeper, the one who avoided conflict at all costs. To hear that he had stood up to his father, had left his home in defiance, was both shocking and inspiring. "I couldn't stay there, not after everything he said. I needed to get away, to clear my head, and that's why I came here." I reached out and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, offering what little comfort I could. "You're always welcome here, Jake," I said, my voice soft. "We'll figure this out together, okay? We'll face whatever's in those mountains, and we'll do it as a team." Jake nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Thanks, man," he said. "I don't know what I'd do without you and Maya. You guys are the best friends I've ever had." And with that, we settled in for the night, knowing that our journey into the mountains was fast approaching, and that whatever lay ahead, we'd face it together, as friends, as allies against whatever lurked in the dark. The last day of school before the ritual was bittersweet. On one hand, it marked the end of our high school years, a time of growth and friendship. On the other hand, it was a stark reminder of the dangerous journey that lay ahead of us. We were excused from classes for the day, a gesture from the school to allow us time to prepare ourselves for the ritual. Maya, Jake and I spent the day together, our minds filled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. We started the day by meeting up at our favourite spot by the river, where we had spent so many afternoons together over the years. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts, before Maya suggested that we take a walk through the small cropping of woods nearby. As we walked, we talked about our hopes and fears, about what we hoped to achieve from the ritual. Maya talked about her desire to prove herself, to show that she was capable of facing anything head-on. Jake talked about his need to escape his father's control, to find a way to forge his own path in life. And I talked about my dream of leaving our town behind, of going to college and making something of myself. But as the day wore on, our thoughts turned more sombre. As we looped back around to our favourite spot, we at last discussed Jake's conversation with his father. We sat on the grass, the sound of the river flowing beside us, and Jake recounted the details of his confrontation with his father for Maya. He wouldn't tell me much, but he did say that there are things in the mountains. But what things? Maya asked. Jake shook his head, his expression grim. He wouldn't say. Maya had always been fascinated by anything supernatural. It's always been an interesting mix, as well, of skepticism and belief. Well, she's a rational thinker and relies on logic in most situations. She also has a deep-seated fascination with the supernatural. She's the kind of person who loves ghost stories and urban legends, always eager to explore the unknown. When Jake told us about his father's cryptic words regarding the mountains and the ritual, Maya's mind immediately started spinning with possibilities. She began speculating about what might be lurking in the mountains, drawing on her knowledge of folklore and legend. I've heard stories, Maya began, her voice tinged with excitement. Stories about ancient spirits that dwell in the mountains, spirits that guard sacred places and demand offerings in return for protection. Maybe the ritual is a way to appease these spirits, to ensure they continue to protect our town. But what if it's something else? Jake cut in. The way my dad looked when he was talking about it all, it doesn't seem like he was talking about a fairy godmother out there, ready to bippity-boppity-boo the town to another year of safety. Maya, ever the optimist, believed that whatever lurked in the mountains was friendly, perhaps even guardian spirits watching over the town. I refuse to believe whatever's in those mountains is evil, Maya insisted, her voice filled with conviction. There are stories from cultures all over the world about benevolent spirits that protect sacred places. Maybe that's what's in the mountains, spirits that mean us no harm. But Jake would not be convinced. He had seen the fear in his father's eyes, heard the urgency in his voice, and was convinced that whatever lay in the mountains was far from friendly. You're being naive, Maya, Jake argued, his voice tinged with frustration. Look at the facts. Many students never return from the ritual. My father's reaction alone should tell you whatever's out there is dangerous. We can't afford to be hopeful and optimistic. We need to be cautious and prepared. Maya bristled at Jake's words, her eyes flashing with indignation. Just because your father is afraid doesn't mean you should be too. Maybe he just doesn't understand. Maybe he's been fed lies his whole life. We can't let fear dictate our actions. The argument raged on, with Maya and Jake both standing their ground, each convinced of their own perspective. Maya saw the mountains as a place of wonder and mystery, full of friendly spirits and benevolent forces. Jake saw them as a place of danger and darkness, full of sinister creatures and malevolent beings. As for me, I couldn't help but feel torn between the two. Part of me wanted to believe Maya, to hold on to the hope that there was something good and pure in the mountains. But another part of me, a part that had seen too much and heard too many stories, couldn't shake the feeling that Jake might be right, that the mountains held secrets best left undisturbed. At sunset, the townspeople gathered on the edge of town to see off the volunteers, myself included, as we prepared to head out into the mountains in search of the sacred stone. My mother was there, her eyes filled with pride and worry as she hugged me tightly, wishing me well and safety on my journey. It was hard to part from her, knowing that the mountains held unknown dangers, that I might never see her again. But I knew I had to be strong, for her and for myself, and I promised to return safely. Maya's family was also there, her parents and siblings surrounding her, their faces etched with concern. Maya's brother had volunteered for the ritual 3 years ago and had never returned, leaving a shadow of worry over her family. They hugged her tightly, whispering words of love and encouragement, and Maya held back tears as she said her goodbyes, determined to succeed where her brother had failed. But Jake's family was nowhere to be seen, a fact that did not go unnoticed by the townspeople. Jake stood alone, his jaw clenched, his eyes focused on the mountain ahead. It was clear that his decision to participate in the ritual had caused a real rift between him and his family, and the absence of his family support weighed heavily upon him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd, the mayor stepped forward to address us. He spoke of the importance of the ritual, of the need to protect our town and uphold our traditions. He spoke of the volunteers' bravery and sacrifice, and the crowd murmured their approval, their voices filled with respect and admiration. And then, with a final wave to the crowd, we turned and began our journey into the mountains, our hearts heavy with the knowledge of the dangers that lay ahead, but filled with a sense of purpose and determination. The initial path into the mountains was a narrow trail that wound its way through dense forest, the trees towering above us like silent sentinels. The air was cool and crisp, and the sounds of the forest were all around us. The rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, the distant murmur of a stream. As we set out, Maya, Jake and I stayed close together, our footsteps echoing on the forest floor. We had made a pact early on not to run, to conserve our energy for the long journey ahead. We knew that the path to the mountaintop would be treacherous and arduous, and we wanted to be prepared. As we walked, we could hear the sounds of other groups ahead of us, their voices fading into the distance as they pushed on ahead. A few teams had already run off ahead, eager to make progress and perhaps find the sacred stone before anyone else. But we stuck to our plan, moving at a steady pace, taking in our surroundings and keeping a watchful eye out for signs of danger. The path was steep in places, and we had to navigate rocky outcroppings and fallen trees, but we pressed on, determined to reach our goal. As we continued along the path, it eventually split into 3 branches, each one disappearing into the dense foliage of the forest. The sounds of the other participants had long faded away, and we found ourselves completely alone, surrounded by the quiet of the forest. "We must have been going slower than we thought," Jake remarked, his voice tinged with frustration. "Everyone must have pushed ahead while we were taking it easy." I glanced at Maya, who looked equally concerned. We had all agreed on a plan for which route to take once the trail split. But now that we were faced with 3 options, instead of our 2, our maps were useless. "We need to choose a path," Maya said, her voice firm. "We can't stand here arguing. We need to keep moving." But Jake and I weren't so sure. Without a map to guide us, we had no way of knowing which path would lead us in the right direction. We argued amongst ourselves, each of us advocating for a different path, each of us unsure of what lay ahead. "This one looks like it leads towards higher ground," Jake argued, pointing to the leftmost path. "We might be able to get a better view of our surroundings from up there." "But what if it leads us further away from the mountain?" I countered, gesturing towards the middle path. "We need to stay on course if we're going to find the stone." Maya listened to our arguments, her brow furrowed in thought. "What if we split up?" she suggested. "We each take a different path, and we meet back here in an hour to compare notes." It was a risky plan, but it was the best option we had. With a nod of agreement, we each chose a path and set off into the unknown, hoping that our choices would lead us closer to our goal, and not farther away. As I wandered off along the middle path, alone in the darkness of the forest, couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. The trees loomed overhead, their branches casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance in the flickering light of my flashlight. The air was thick with the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, the distant hoot of an owl. I felt a sense of isolation, of being cut off from the world as I walked deeper into the forest. The path was narrow and uneven, and I had to watch my step to avoid tripping over roots and rocks. Every sound, every rustle in the undergrowth sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows behind me. But I pressed on, my determination to find the sacred stone overriding my fear. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on moving forward, despite the darkness and the uncertainty. I knew that Maya and Jake were out there somewhere, following their own paths, and that we would meet back at the fork in the road in an hour to compare notes. As I walked, my mind wandered, thoughts of the ritual and its purpose swirling in my head. I thought about the town and the people we had left behind, wondering if they were waiting for us, if they were counting on us to succeed where others had failed. As I walked along the middle path, straining my ears for signs of other groups, the silence of the forest was deafening. I listened intently, hoping to hear the distant voices or the crunch of footsteps that would indicate that others had passed this way. But all I heard was the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. I scanned the trail under my feet, hoping to see footprints or snack wrappers left behind by other participants. The forest floor was untouched, as if no one had passed this way before. The darkness seemed to swallow up any signs of human presence, leaving me feeling more isolated and alone. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest, desperate to find some indication that I was on the right path. But as I walked, the forest grew thicker, the trail more difficult to follow. I began to doubt my decision to go it alone. I was about to turn back, to retrace my steps and return to the split and wait for Maya and Jake, when I heard it. A faint rustling in the undergrowth. The sound of something moving through the bushes ahead of me. My heart skipped a beat and I froze, listening intently. The rustling grew louder, closer. I held my breath, unsure of what to expect. And then, out of the darkness, emerged Maya, her face pale but determined, a flashlight in hand. "I heard something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think there might be someone or something else out here with us." Relief washed over me as I realised that I was no longer alone, that Maya was here with me. But where was Jake? Worry gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something might have happened to him, that he might be lost or in trouble. I knew that we had agreed to meet back at the fork of the road in an hour. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving him behind for 1 second longer. "Maya, we have to go back," I said, my voice filled with urgency. "We have to backtrack to where the paths split and meet with Jake like we planned. He might need our help." Maya hesitated, her brow furrowed in thought. "But what if he's okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "What if he's just taking longer than expected? We can't afford to lose time backtracking." I could see her point, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we needed to find Jake. "Please, Maya," I pleaded, my voice cracking with emotion. "Can't just leave him out here alone. We have to go back." After another moment of hesitation, Maya nodded, her expression resolute. "Okay, let's go back," she said, her voice steady. "But we have to be quick. We can't afford to get lost ourselves." As we retraced our steps, Maya told me about her journey along her chosen path. She had followed the trail for a while, but when she heard the rustling in the bushes, she had a feeling that someone or something was following her. She decided to leave the trail and investigate, eventually running into me. "I just had this feeling," Maya explained, her voice thoughtful. "Like there was something out here, something that wanted to be found. I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant to find you." I listened to Maya's words, a sense of awe washing over me. It seemed like fate had brought us together, that our paths had crossed for a reason. As Maya and I arrived back at the fork in the trail where we were supposed to meet with Jake, a sinking feeling settled into the pit of my stomach. Jake was nowhere to be found. We waited at the fork for half an hour, hoping he would appear. There was no sign of him. "We have to go look for him," I insisted. "He could be lost or injured. We can't just leave him out here alone." But Maya shook her head, her expression resolute. "We can't afford to waste time. We need to keep moving forward towards the mountain. Jake knows the plan. If he's not here, he must have decided to keep following his path. We have to trust that he knows what he's doing." I could understand Maya's logic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we needed to find Jake. He was our friend, He was out here somewhere, alone and possibly in danger. I just couldn't leave him behind. We can't just leave him, I said, pleading. What if he's hurt? What if he needs our help? We have to at least try to find him. But Maya was adamant. No, we have to keep going. We can't risk getting lost ourselves. Jake knows the risks. He knows what he signed up for. We just have to trust that he'll catch up with us later. I knew Maya was right. That we couldn't afford to jeopardize our own safety by going off course to look for Jake. The thought of leaving him behind, alone in the darkness of the forest, filled me with a sense of dread. I pulled the useless map from my backpack and tore off a piece, scribbling a note for Jake telling him where we went, and stuck it in the ground at the start of the middle path with a stick, before following Maya reluctantly back up the middle path. Every part of me hoped that Jake had found the way and continued on, rather than turning back. As Maya and I retraced our path, the darkness of the forest felt even more oppressive than before. The sounds of the night seemed to close in around us, the rustle of leaves and the creak of branches echoing in the stillness. We pressed on, the trail becoming increasingly difficult to follow as we navigated through the dense undergrowth. The path soon became non-existent, and we found ourselves relying on instinct and memory to guide us through the woods. The terrain became rougher, the ground uneven and littered with fallen branches and rocks. We carefully picked our way through the underbrush, the darkness making each step treacherous. As we ascended higher into the mountains, the path became even steeper and more challenging. We encountered outcroppings of rocks that jutted out from the ground, their jagged edges a reminder of the dangers that surrounded us. We had to tread carefully, using our hands to steady ourselves as we climbed, the fear of falling ever present in our minds. While the darkness was pressing in around us, the tension in the air was palpable. And then suddenly, a sound pierced the stillness of the night. It was a shout, a cry of pain or distress, coming from deep within the trees to our left. Without thinking, without hesitating, I tore off through the woods towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. "Wait! Don't go!" Maya called after me. "It could be a trap! It could be dangerous!" But I didn't listen. All I could think about was Jake, alone and possibly in danger, and I had to find him. I pushed my way through the underbrush, branches scraping at my face and arms, the ground uneven beneath my feet. The shouting grew louder, more desperate, and I knew I was getting closer. And then suddenly I burst into a clearing, and there he was. Jake was lying on the ground, clutching his leg in pain, his face contorted in agony. Without hesitation, I rushed to his side, kneeling beside him, my hands trembling as I tried to assess his injuries. His ankle was swollen and bruised. As I gently removed his shoe and sock, I saw the source of his pain. A deep gash on his ankle, oozing blood and looking raw and painful. "What happened?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. I fell," Jake gasped, his words coming out in a strained whisper. "I twisted my ankle. I couldn't move." Jake winced as I examined the wound, his jaw clenched in pain. Maya hovered nearby, her expression one of concern. I pulled off my backpack and retrieved the first aid kit I had brought with me. Carefully cleaned out the gash on his ankle, trying to be as gentle as possible despite the pain he must have been feeling. As I worked, I noticed that Jake seemed to be missing his backpack of supplies. I asked him about it, and he furrowed his brow in confusion. "I had it before I came into the clearing and fell," he insisted. "I don't know what happened to it." I glanced around, but there was no sign of the missing backpack. It was strange, as we had all been careful in bringing our supplies with us. I couldn't understand how Jake could have lost his. "It's okay, we'll figure it out," I reassured him, finishing up with his wound and wrapping it carefully. "We'll make do with what we have for now." As Maya and I helped Jake to his feet, it was clear that he was in pain, but he was determined to continue on. Maya was concerned and wanted to return to town to get Jake proper medical attention. But Jake was insistent that he wanted to stay and find the sacred stone, no matter what. "I can walk," Jake insisted. "I might be slow and I might limp, but I can still walk. We can't give up now. We have to find the stone." Despite our concerns, Maya and I knew that we couldn't force Jake to leave. He was determined to see the ritual through to the end, no matter the cost. Reluctantly, we allowed Jake to step off as he defiantly continued forward, his jaw set and his eyes focused on the path ahead. As we walked, Jake's limp became more pronounced, and I could see the pain etched on his face with each step. But he didn't complain, didn't falter. He was determined to complete the ritual, to find the sacred stone and fulfill his duty to the town. Maya and I exchanged worried glances, unsure of what lay ahead. The path was treacherous, and with Jake injured, our journey was bound to be even more challenging now. But we couldn't abandon Jake now, not when he needed us the most. And so we pressed on, following Jake as he limped along the path, driving us forward. As we continued our journey, the fear and anxiety in our group began to grow. Jake's flashlight battery was dying, casting a dim light that barely illuminated anything ahead. We had to group up really close together, our shadows dancing on the trees around us, the darkness pressing in on all sides. With each step, the sounds of the forest seemed to grow louder and more ominous. Strange noises echoed through the trees, rustlings and creaking that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I could feel the tension in the air, a sense of unease that seemed to permeate everything around us. "We need to keep moving," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. "We can't stop now." As we pressed on, the strange sounds seemed to grow louder and more menacing. Shadows flickered in the darkness, shapes moving just beyond the edge of our vision. I could feel the fear creeping in, threatening to overwhelm me. But we couldn't afford to give in to the fear. We had come this far. We had to see this through to the end. We had to find the sacred stone no matter what dangers lurked in the darkness. And so we pushed forward, our eyes and ears alert for any sign of what lay ahead. Eventually, up ahead, we saw what looked like an opening to another small clearing. As we approached the opening, I could see flickering lights in the trees that looked like flashlights from other ritual participants. Hope surged within me as I realised we were not alone, that the others were still out here and searching for the sacred stone as well. Entering the clearing, I was struck by the strange, eerie glow of the moonlight bathing the area. A small stream ran through the clearing, disappearing into the woods on either side. It was a peaceful scene, yet an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. distance, I could make out two other students that I sort of recognised. They were far away, their figures obscured by the beams of their flashlights that they kept pointed at us. But something seemed off about them. I called out to them, hoping for a friendly response. "Hey, it's Alex, Jake and Maya. Are you guys okay?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the clearing. The two figures turned towards us, their movements slow and deliberate. They responded in a strange, almost robotic manner, their voices devoid of emotion. "We are fine. Please continue with the ritual," one of them said, their voice flat and monotone. I exchanged puzzled glances with Maya and Jake, unsure of what to make of the situation. Something didn't feel right, and my instincts told me to proceed with caution. But we couldn't turn back. We had come too far to give up. We had to cross the clearing to continue onward. As we slowly made our way across the clearing, the figures in the distance marking us with their flickering flashlights, couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching us like predators stalking their prey. Panic began to rise up in my chest, a primal fear gripping me, but I couldn't understand why. We continued to move forward, the figures keeping their distance, but never taking their eyes off of us. As we approached the stream that ran through the clearing, I paused for a moment, wondering why the figures weren't moving closer to us. It was as if they were waiting for something, but for what? I couldn't say. "Guys, something doesn't feel right," I whispered to Maya and Jake. "Why aren't they coming closer? Why are they just watching us like that?" Maya and Jake exchanged worried glances, their expressions mirroring my own unease. We knew that we had to cross the stream to continue our journey, but the thought of passing by those strange figures of our classmates filled me with a sense of dread. Gathering my courage, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, wading into the cold, rushing water of the stream. As I waded into the stream, the water rushing around my legs, I noticed that the other students' flashlights suddenly went off, plunging the clearing into what would be darkness, if not for the strange, eerie glow of the moonlight that was casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the night. In the dim light, I could finally see the faces of the other students clearly for the first time, and what I saw filled me with horror. Their features were distorted, their eyes weeping pools of black, their skin weirdly silvery in the moonlight. They moved towards us slowly, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes being controlled by unseen strings. I stumbled back in shock, my heart pounding in my chest. Maya and Jake stood frozen beside me, their faces mirroring my own fear and disbelief. The figures continued to advance, their gaze fixed on us with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. "We have to get out of here," Maya whispered. "They're not human. They're something else." Without another word, we turned and ran, splashing through the stream and into the woods on the other side. Behind us, I could hear the sounds of pursuit, the figures moving through the darkness with an earthly speed. We ran faster, tugging on Jake to help him keep up with his injured leg, our hearts racing, the fear of what lay behind us driving us forward. As we finally stopped to catch our breath, the sounds of pursuit fading in the distance, relief washed over me. We had lost the other students, at least for now. Maya, Jake and I stood together, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "What the hell was that?" Maya exclaimed, her voice filled with disbelief. "And what was wrong with their eyes? They looked... I don't even know how to describe it." Jake looked oddly pale, his breathing heavy. He was really starting to struggle with his injured leg, which was bleeding freely through the bandages again. I could see the pain etched on his face, and I knew that we needed to find help for him soon. "I don't know," I said, my own voice trembling. "But we need to keep moving. We can't stay here." We continued through the forest, our senses heightened and our nerves on edge. We tried as best as we could to be as quiet as possible. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Like other creatures. Like the students that we had encountered in the clearing. More of them might be lurking in the darkness. Jake was really struggling now, his injured leg slowing us down considerably. We had to stop frequently to allow him to rest, his face contorted in pain. Maya and I did our best to support him, but the progress was slow and agonising. Every minute felt like an eternity, the fear of what lay ahead gnawing at us. Despite our best efforts to stay quiet, the forest seemed to come alive around us. Strange noises echoed through the trees, with shadows dancing in the moonlight. I could feel the tension in the air, a sense of foreboding that made my skin crawl. As we stopped again to allow Jake to rest, the forest around us seemed to hold its breath. I strained my ears, listening intently, and that's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps coming towards us in the woods. I signalled to Maya, and we quickly killed our flashlights, hoping that we wouldn't be seen. Peering into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of shoes and legs moving through the woods nearby. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. The footsteps drew closer. I was about to call out to the figure when I noticed something strange. The steps being taken were oddly rigid and stiff, almost mechanical. A chill ran down my spine as I immediately was reminded of the other students that we had encountered in the clearing. Whispering to Maya to stay with Jake, I slowly crept along, following the direction in which the creatures were heading. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they might lead us out of the woods, or at least towards the sacred stone, and thus out of this nightmare. As I moved through the darkness, the sounds of the forest around me seemed to fade away, replaced by the steady, mechanical footsteps of the creatures ahead. I moved as quietly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest, unsure of what I would find at the end of this eerie trail. About 15 minutes or so of creeping through the darkness, following the mechanical footsteps as well as I could. I knew that I was a good distance away from where I had left Maya and Jake. The forest around me was still and ominous, with only the barest hint of moonlight managing to filter in through the trees. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air, echoing through the woods. My heart skipped a beat as I realised it was coming from up ahead, where the creatures were headed. Without hesitation, I quickened my pace, trying to keep to the shadows and out of sight as much as possible as I moved closer to the source of the scream. The footsteps ahead of me suddenly sped up, the creatures breaking out into an odd sort of run towards the sound of the scream. I followed suit, moving as quickly and as quietly as I could, my heartbeat throbbing in my ears. As I neared the source of the scream, I crouched behind a tree, peering out into a small clearing up ahead. In the moonlight, I could see a figure lying on the ground surrounded by the creatures. They were humanoid in shape, but their features were distorted and grotesque, their movements jerky and unnatural. As I watched in horror, I could see that some of the creatures were my classmates who had come out to participate in the ritual this year. They looked mostly normal, except for two disturbing features. Their skin was oddly silvery, reflecting the moonlight in a strange and unnatural way. Their eyes were the most unsettling part. They appeared to be weeping black holes, devoid of any emotion or humanity. Mixed in among my classmates were other creatures that were far more grotesque. These beings were only torn scraps of clothing that suggested they might once have been human, but now they were twisted and monstrous. Their bodies were emaciated, their limbs strangely elongated and thin, ending in sharp claws that gleamed in the moonlight. Their mouths were filled with rows of jagged teeth, their ears pointed and elongated, twitching as they listened for any sound. Their eyes were sunken and hollow, with those same weeping black pools. The small bead of flowing red in the centre as a pupil. A gleam of malevolence that made my skin crawl. Their skin, too, was silvery and cracked all over, like the desert floor, and reflected the moonlight around them until they seemed almost to glow. The creatures were hunched over the figure on the ground, their strange silvery skin glistening in the moonlight. Their legs were bent backwards, their emaciated forms revealing ribs and spines that stuck out unnaturally. They moved closer to the figure lying on the ground, their movements jerky and disjointed, and I couldn't help be reminded again of the marionettes that I had seen at a puppet show I had attended in first grade. Their hair was matted and tangled, full of leaves and twigs from the forest floor. As they drew nearer to the figure on the ground, it cried out again, a sound of pain and terror that sent a chill down my spine and stopped my heart. I watched in horror as the creatures closed in, their clawed hands reaching out. The figure tried to scramble away, but the creatures were too fast, too relentless in their pursuit. I knew I had to do something, that I couldn't just stand by and watch these creatures attack whoever that poor soul was lying on the floor at their mercy. With a surge, I stepped out from behind the tree, my voice ringing out in the darkness. "Leave them alone!" I shouted, hoping to distract the creatures and give the figure a chance to escape. The creatures turned towards me, their black, empty eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, there was a pause, a tense silence that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, with a chorus of unearthly shrieks, the creatures lunged towards me, their claws outstretched. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that I had to find a way to escape myself now. As I ran through the forest, trying to evade the monsters that pursued me, I quickly realised that they were much faster than they had appeared. Their movements, though strange and oddly mechanical, allowed them to move with terrifying speed, easily closing the distance between us. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to put as much distance between myself and the creatures as possible. The underbrush tore at my clothes and skin, but I pushed on, driven by the sheer terror and adrenaline. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my leg as one of the creatures managed to scratch with its claw. I cried out in pain, but I didn't dare to slow down. I could feel warm blood running down the back of my thigh, but I forced myself to keep running, knowing that stopping would mean certain doom. The forest was closing in around me, the shadows twisting and shifting, making it difficult to see where I was going. I could hear the creatures behind me, their unearthly shrieks echoing through the trees, driving me forward with a renewed sense of urgency. Despite the pain and exhaustion, I pushed myself to keep running, my lungs burning with the effort of trying to draw enough breath to fuel my aching muscles. I burst out of the trees and back onto the path where I had left Maya and Jake, my heart pounding in my ears. "We have to go, now!" I screamed at them, my voice filled with desperation. The three of us started running, putting all of our energy into escaping the creatures that pursued us. But Jake couldn't keep up, his injured ankle slowing him down. He stumbled and fell, and before he could get back up, he was swarmed by the creatures. I wanted to go back and help him, but Maya grabbed me and pulled me away, her eyes wide with fear. "We have to keep going!" she shouted, her voice breaking. Reluctantly, I followed her, knowing that if we stayed, we would meet the same fate as Jake. As we ran, I could hear the sickening sounds of Jake's screams behind us. A sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. Tears streamed down my face as we made our escape, the sounds of distant crunching turning my stomach. As Maya and I continued to run, our breaths ragged and our hearts pounding, we stumbled and cried our way back to the clearing with the stream. We had gained some distance from the creatures, who were likely distracted by whatever gruesome fate had befallen Jake, but we knew that they were starting to catch up. With determination driving us, we rushed towards the stream and plunged into the icy waters. The shock of the cold hit me like a physical blow, and I screamed out in pain as the water stung the wound on the back of my thigh, where one of the creatures had scratched me. Despite the pain, I forced myself to keep moving, knowing that we couldn't afford to stop. Maya followed in suit, the two of us clinging to each other as we pushed through the water, the current tugging at our legs. Finally, we reached the other side of the stream and scrambled up on the bank, gasping for breath. We knew we couldn't rest long, for the creatures that were our former classmates would soon be hot on our heels. Lying on the bank, gasping for breath, I watched in horror as the creatures burst through the trees into the clearing. Maya and I scrambled to our feet, knowing that we had to keep running. But as we did, something strange happened. The creatures stopped at the edge of the stream, their movements jerky and uncertain. They seemed unable to cross the boundary of the stream, as if some invisible barrier prevented them from doing so. I stared in disbelief, realizing that we had found a temporary sanctuary from the creatures. The realization filled me with both relief and dread. Relief that we were safe for the moment, but dread at the thought of what might happen if they were able to find a way across that river, or if we were unable to find a way out of the forest. Maya and I stood there for a moment, catching our breath and watching as the creatures paced back and forth along the bank, their eyes fixed on us. Then, without a word, we turned and ran, putting as much distance between ourselves and the creatures as possible, hoping to find a way out of the forest before they could find a way across the stream. As Maya and I ran, the adrenaline that had fueled us began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. My muscles burned. My lungs felt like they were on fire. I stumbled and fell against the tree, gasping for breath, my whole body shaking with fatigue. "We have to go back to town," I gasped, the words barely audible between breaths. "Someone else must have found the stone by now. We can't keep going like this." But Maya was insistent, her eyes blazing with determination. "No, we can't leave. We have to find a way around those creatures and continue upwards. The town's safety depends on it. If we don't bring back the stone, imagine what those things would do to the town, to our families. We can't risk it. We have to keep going." I wanted to argue, to tell her that we were no match for these creatures, but I could see the resolve in her eyes. And I knew she was right. If those things made their way into town, there was no telling what they would do or who would get hurt. I pictured my mother being surrounded like Jake had been on the ground, and I suppressed a sob. I struggled to my feet, my thigh trembling from the weight I was putting on my leg. Would I be the next Jake? Too slow to keep up and outrun the monsters living in the darkness? I tried to shove those thoughts out of my mind as I followed along behind Maya. We took care to try and circle as far away from the creatures as we could. Every sound, every rustle of leaves made us jump, afraid that the creatures would find us again. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie glows that seemed to dance and shift with our movements. I was on edge, knowing that any one of those shadows could be another of those terrifying creatures, ready to seal our fate for good. We moved slowly and cautiously, our senses on high alert. Every now and then, we would hear the distant cries of the creatures, or the horrified screams of a ritual participant, a chilling reminder of the danger that lurked nearby. Maya and I stayed close together, relying on each other for support and comfort as we navigated through the darkness. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the trees looming ahead like silent sentinels. We tried to keep track of our surroundings, but everything looked the same in the dim moonlight that filtered through the trees, making it easy to get disoriented. We stumbled over roots and fallen branches, our progress slow and painstaking. My thigh burned with pain, and I could feel the itchy feeling of the blood running down the back of my leg and into my shoe. As we pressed on, the sounds of the creatures seemed to grow fainter, a sign that we took to mean we were moving in the right direction. We tried to stay as quiet as possible, not wanting to draw attention to ourselves. Eventually, the only sounds were the rustling of leaves underfoot and the hoot of a single owl in the distance. Our path grew steadily steeper as we neared closer to the top of the mountain. The trees were pressed in on us tightly. Every step was a struggle, the terrain rugged and unforgiving. Eventually, we came across a stream, running directly across our path. I recognised it immediately as the same stream we had crossed before. It circled around and come to a different part of it, which meant that we would have to cross it again to continue our ascent. I felt a sense of dread wash over me as I looked at the stream. I knew that crossing it meant that we would start encountering those creatures again. The thought chilled me, but I knew that we had no choice but to press on. Maya and I approached the stream cautiously, stepping gingerly over the slippery rocks. The water was icy cold, sending a chill through my bones as I waded through it. I bit down hard on my lip as my wounded thigh submerged in the water. It felt like cold fire coursing through my veins, but I knew I had to press on. We reached the other side of the stream, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the pit of my stomach. I knew that those creatures were out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for us. We had to be careful, to stay alert and vigilant at all times. We continued our ascent, the path growing steeper and more treacherous with each step. The air grew thinner, making it difficult to catch our breath. But we pushed on, driven by the knowledge that our town, and the fates of everyone in it, relied on us. As Maya and I approached the top of the mountain, the trees began to open up, their branches thinning out to reveal the starry sky above. The wind whipped through the sparse trees, sending a chill through my wet clothing. I shivered, feeling miserable in the cold night air. Just inside the tree line, I spotted what appeared to be a path, beaten into the earth. It seemed as though it circled the top of the mountain, worn down over the ages by thousands of feet having travelled over it. It had to be the path to the sacred stone, the final leg of our journey. It just had to be. Maya and I stood at a crossroads, uncertain which way to go. The path stretched out before us, disappearing into the darkness. We knew that choosing the wrong path could lead to disaster. I looked at Maya, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. She looked back at me, determination shining in her eyes. She was tall and slender, with long flowing black hair that cascaded down her back in a river of darkness. Her hair was thick and lustrous, shining in the moonlight like a curtain of silk. Her face was heart-shaped, with high cheekbones and a delicate jawline. Her skin was smooth and flawless, with a natural olive tone that hinted at her heritage, and seemed to almost glow in the silvery moonlight. Her eyes were her most striking feature. Large, almond-shaped and a deep, soulful brown. They seemed to hold a world of wisdom and mystery, reflecting the light of the moon like twin pools of liquid chocolate, framed by her long, thick lashes that fluttered softly when she blinked. I knew in that moment that I was in love with her. The ache in my thigh faded away to be replaced by an ache in my chest. An ache that longed to reach out and pull her close to me. As we walked, the wind howled around us, whipping through the trees and sending a chill down my spine. The path seemed to stretch on forever. We walked in silence, lost in our own thoughts, each of us hoping that we were headed in the right direction. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps coming through the trees, the sound of shuffling and occasional grunts of pain. I panicked, knowing that it was probably one of those creatures coming to get us. Without thinking, I grabbed Maya by the arm and pulled her behind a nearby tree. hoping to hide from whatever was approaching. As the sounds grew closer, I peeked out from behind the tree to see who or what was coming. To my horror, it was Maya. Her clothes were torn and bloodied, and she was covered in wounds. She had a huge gash on her stomach that she was clutching with one hand, her face contorted in pain as she struggled upwards up the mountain. I gasped, unable to believe what I was seeing. Maya was hurt, badly hurt, and yet she was still pushing forward, determined to reach the sacred stone. I wanted to go to her, to help her. Tears filled my eyes as I watched her stagger onwards, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was a fighter. I knew that, but even she had her limits. I could see the pain and exhaustion etched on her face. As I watched Maya struggling up the mountain, the true horror of what I was witnessing slowly dawned on me. If that was Maya, then the Maya I had been with all this time was something else entirely. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned to face her, dread gnawing at my insides. The creature that had taken on Maya's form was smiling at me, but its smile that threatened to wrench my sanity apart. Her face seemed to slither and shift beneath the surface, her skin moving in unnatural ways. Her eyes, once so soulful and brown, had receded into her head, leaving behind two weeping black pools that seemed to stare into my very soul. I stumbled back in horror, my mind reeling from the revelation. How could I have been so blind? The creature had been with me this whole time, masquerading as my friend, leading me deeper into the darkness. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal, mixed with a bone-deep fear that threatened to paralyze me. I had trusted this thing, confided in it, and it had been deceiving me all along. The creature took a step towards me, its movements becoming jerky and unnatural. It reached out a hand towards me, its fingers slowly elongating into twisted, claw-like appendages. I wanted to scream, to run, but fear held me rooted to the spot. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I turned and fled. Crashing through the underbrush as I tried to put as much distance between myself and that creature as possible. I could hear it behind me, its footsteps echoing through the night, but I didn't look back. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, the creature hot on my heels. I could hear its ragged breathing behind me, feel its malevolent presence closing in. I had to reach Maya, had to warn her before it was too late. Maya, run! Get away! I shouted as I ran, my voice hoarse with fear. I could see her ahead, struggling her way up the hill, her face contorted in pain. She looked back at me, confusion and fear in her eyes. As I drew closer, I could see that Maya was holding something in her hand. Something small and shiny. It was a small pocket-sized mirror, gleaming in the moonlight. Without thinking, she held it up in the direction of the creature. The creature caught a glimpse of itself in the mirror and let out a piercing shriek, reeling back in pain. It clawed at its eyes, trying to rid itself of the painful reflection. Maya seized the opportunity and turned, hobbling as fast as she could away from the creature, ever upwards towards the mountaintop. I reached her just as the creature began to recover, its shrieks echoing through the night. I grabbed Maya's hand and we ran together, putting as much distance between us as possible. As we ran, Maya explained that she had remembered an old superstition about creatures being repelled by their own reflections, and had hoped it would work as a last resort when a group of them had set upon her earlier. Luckily, it had worked. As we broke out of the tree line and into the open air, I looked back over my shoulder and saw the creature receding into the darkness, still clutching its eyes in pain. We had escaped, thanks to Maya's quick thinking and a small mirror. Maya and I struggled along the path that circled at the top of the mountain, her leaning heavily on me for support. Every step was a challenge for her, and I could hear her grunting with pain and effort as she tried to hold the wound in her stomach. I wanted to lay her down and use the first aid kit to help her, but she refused. She knew that if she sat down, she might not be able to get back up again. We moved slowly, each step feeling like an eternity. Maya's breath came in ragged gasps, and I could feel her trembling against me. I marvelled sadly at the determination in her eyes, the fierce resolve that kept her going despite the pain. I tried to offer her words of encouragement, to tell her that we were almost there, that we would make it through this together. She smiled weakly at me, her face pale and drawn with pain. And I knew that she was drawing on every last ounce of strength she had to keep going. As we rounded a bend in the path, I could see a small summit looming ahead of us, and the entrance to a cave, soft light glowing from within. We're almost there, just a little further. Maya nodded. As we approached the opening of the cave, the soft glow of lights emanating from within seemed to grow brighter, like torches. My heart raced with anticipation. This must be where the sacred stone was kept. We had finally reached our goal. Maya was struggling to stay conscious, with strength waning from the effort of the climb and the injury to her stomach. I knew we needed to keep moving, to reach the stone before it was too late. To try to keep her awake, I started talking, telling her about the creatures and how they had stopped chasing us when we passed the river. I told her about their twisted forms, their silvery skin and weeping black eyes. I described how they moved with unnatural, mechanical gait. I described how the fake her had found me on the path when the three of us split up, and we had found Jake together. I told her about his injury and what ultimately happened to him. Maya listened as intently as she could, her eyes fluttering open as she fought to stay awake. But how did the one that looked like me cross the stream when the others couldn't? She managed through strained gasps as we struggled along. A horror washed over me like a wave as the realization sunk in. She was right. The other creatures, the ones that had pursued us through the forest, had been unable to cross the stream. It had seemed like a barrier, a boundary to safety that they could not pass. But the creature that had disguised itself as Maya had crossed it effortlessly. My mind reeled with the implications. If the creature could cross the stream, then what else was it capable of? How had it been able to mimic Maya so perfectly, to fool us into believing it was her? Fear gripped me, a cold and clammy hand squeezing at my heart. I didn't answer her. As Maya and I entered the cave, the sight that greeted us was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The walls were lined with torches, their flames casting flickering shadows that danced along the rough stone. Every inch seemed to have been carved with an elaborate series of interlocking symbols, the patterns looping around and around the room like a spiral, the chain never breaking. The air inside was stiflingly warm, a stark contrast to the chill of the mountain air inside. I could see a set of stairs at the back of the cave, carved out of the mountain itself and leading downwards. The stars seemed to beckon to me, promising answers, and perhaps even the sacred stone that we had come to retrieve. But Maya was at the end of her strength. She stumbled and sank down against the wall near the stairs. I could see the exhaustion etched into every line on her perfect face, the pain of her injuries writ large in her eyes. I can't go on, she gasped, clutching the mirror tightly in her hand. You have to go on without me. I was torn. I wanted to stay with Maya, to help her back down the mountain to safety. But I also knew that the stone was our only hope of saving the town from whatever tragedy awaited it. It was not returned by sunrise. I argued with her, pleaded with her to just go on. But she was adamant. She told me to retrieve the stone, to bring it back to her, and then the two of us would make our way back out down the mountain together once she had recovered her strength. Reluctantly, I agreed. I knew that time was running out. I could see, faintly, from the mouth of the cave, the first hints of the sky beginning to lighten, signalling the coming daybreak. With a final glance at Maya, and a promise to return for her, I turned and began to descend the stairs, the flames of the torch casting long shadows behind me. As I descended the stairs, I twisted and turned, leading me ever deeper into the heart of the mountain. The light from the torches lining the walls didn't penetrate far enough to be able to see by, and eventually was plunged into darkness. I had long since lost my flashlight. I had to struggle onwards, feeling carefully with my foot with every step I took. The fear that I might trip and fall, that the stairs might simply lead to an endless drop in the darkness to my doom, gripped me tightly. I could feel the terror rising within me, battling with the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me at any moment. The suffocating heat of the cave pressed in on me as I made my way further down the stairs. The air was thick and heavy, making each breath a struggle. Sweat dripped down my face and back, soaking my clothes and causing them to cling uncomfortably to my skin. I tried to focus on the task at hand, on reaching the bottom of the stairs and finding the sacred stone. Maya was waiting for me, relying on me to retrieve the stone and bring it back to her so we could escape this nightmare together. With each step, the darkness seemed to grow deeper, the stairs seemingly endless. But I forced myself to keep going, to push through the fear and the exhaustion. I had come too far to turn back now. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I spotted light. The bottom of the stairs slowly came into view as I descended. and I at last reached the bottom. The torches here burned brighter, casting a flickering light that illuminated a small chamber ahead of me. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of foreboding, and I felt as though I had entered another world entirely. The chamber was large and cavernous, with rough-hewn walls that seemed to close in on me. Piles of bones littered the floor, some human, some animal, creating a macabre carpet that crunched underfoot as I moved. The walls were smeared with streaks of dried blood, and intricate carvings covered every inch of stone. The carvings depicted scenes of what must have been the first ritual to occur in this place. A ritual that seemed to involve offerings and sacrifices to an ancient, malevolent deity. As I looked around, I noticed other strange objects scattered throughout the chamber. Crude stone dolls adorned with feathers and beads lay scattered on the floor, their empty eyes staring sightlessly. Skulls of animals, some with ribbons tied around them, others with strange symbols painted on them, were placed on crude altars along the walls. I felt sick as I took in the scene before me. It was clear that this chamber held dark and ancient secrets, secrets that were not meant for human eyes. I knew I needed to retrieve the stone and get out of this place. I moved quickly towards the centre of the chamber, where the glint of the sacred stone caught my eye. It lay atop a small stone pedestal, surrounded by offerings of bones and feathers. As I reached out to touch it, a low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber, sending shivers down my spine. As I turned to look about me, my heart pounding in my chest, I was met with a sight that filled me with so much terror my head swam, and I struggled to even comprehend what I was seeing. The depiction of the ancient deity in the carvings on the walls began to move, at first subtly, and then more pronouncedly, as if the creature was stepping out of the stone and into the chamber. It was monstrous in appearance, with weeping black eyes that seemed to pierce into my very soul, with two little pinpoints of burning flame as pupils. Its skin was a sickly shade of grey, and it was covered in strange, glowing runes that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. This monster, this creature, this god, had 4 arms, each ending in long, razor-sharp claws that dripped with blood. Its massive wings, like those of a bat, stretched outward, casting a shadow over the chamber. Its teeth were long and jagged, like those of a predator, and its legs were muscular and sinewy, ending in feet that resembled those of a bird of prey. As the god stepped fully out of the carving, it let out a deafening roar that shook the chamber, causing pebbles and a showering of dust to trickle down around me. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling with fear and disbelief. As its gaze fell upon me, true, violent terror gripped my heart. Its weeping black eyes pierced into me, and I could feel it bearing down on me. Its head made jerky and unnatural movements, tilting from one side and then to the other as it praised me, its mouth twisting into a horrifying sneer of a smile, filled with hunger. It took a slow, deliberate step towards me. I could see the strange, almost mechanical nature of its movements. Its limbs moved in a disjointed, almost robotic manner, as if controlled by some unseen force. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move. It took another step. I could hear the sound of its claws scraping against the stone floor. Its massive wings twitched and flapped erratically, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. I was no match for this creature. There was no way I could overpower it. The panic was welling up within me as I tried to will my body to move, but it was like I was made of stone. My heart was pounding in my ears. My lungs were screaming for air, and I realised, for the first time, that I had been holding my breath. As it drew within arm's reach, I could feel its hot, putrid breath on my face. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of attacking, the creature let out another low, guttural growl and turned away from me, its attention drawn elsewhere. At last, my body found the will to move, and I quickly snatched the sacred stone from its pedestal and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, back towards the entrance of the chamber. I could hear that thing's roars echoing behind me, but I didn't dare look back. As I raced back up the steps, I slipped the stone into my pocket. I didn't have time to wonder about what had distracted that thing in the first place, or what had happened that it was no longer distracted. I could hear the creature following close behind. The sound of its claws scraping against the stone steps echoed through the tunnel, mingling with the strange sound of its wings flapping against the walls as I raced upwards in the darkness, running up the stairs with my hands and feet like a dog. I dared not look back, knowing that to do so would only slow me down, and all I would see in the darkness would be the glowing red points of its eyes and those strange runes on its body. Instead, I focused all my energy on reaching the top of the stairs and escaping the creature's grasp. My heart pounded in my chest, and every breath felt like fire in my lungs, but I pushed myself onwards, the fear threatening to overtake me. I burst out into the tunnel, into the cave where I had left Maya. My heart sank as I saw she was gone, leaving only a puddle of blood where she had been. I knew I couldn't stop to mourn her loss, so I kept running, racing out of the cave and back along the path. As I ran, the sky began to lighten around me, signalling the approaching dawn. Panic gripped me as I realised that I was very nearly out of time. An ear-splitting roar echoed through the air behind me, and I wheeled around for a moment to look. The god had exited the cave and taken wing, its massive black bat-like wings flapping in the air as it wheeled and turned and began racing in my direction. My legs pumped furiously. I reached the point in the path where I had initially exited the woods and threw myself into the underbrush, racing onwards, hoping that the canopy would force the creature to land, and that it would be slower on the ground. I could hear its roar echoing behind me, getting closer and closer. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I pushed myself to run faster, dodging branches and leaping over fallen logs. I could feel the god's presence looming behind me. I burst into the clearing with the stream at a dead run, my heart pounding in my chest. I raced like mad for the stream as the god once more spread its wings and took to the air to intercept me. With my last bit of strength, I leaped the last few feet to the stream, the icy water shocking my system, numbing my body. I scrambled to my feet, the current pulling at me as I struggled to keep my balance. I could hear that thing screeching in frustration behind me, its wings beating against the air. I knew I had to keep moving, to get as far away as possible while whatever barrier created by the river still held. I forced myself forward, ever downward, roars echoing in my ears as I pushed myself beyond the point of exhaustion. As I ran, I could feel the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, casting long shadows into the woods from overhead. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I burst out of the trees and into the open, the sight of the town looming before me. I could see the first light of dawn reflecting off the windows of the buildings, a beacon of safety in the glowing light. I pushed myself to keep going, eventually falling to my knees as my legs gave out. Crawling along the last few feet of the trail to the painted white line that marked the edge of town, I reached into my pocket to retrieve the stone. My whole body shook with the effort of continuing to move forward. I stretched my hand out towards the line desperately and rolled the sacred stone over the line before passing out. I woke up hours later, lying in a bed in the small hospital in town. My body ached. My mind felt foggy, as if I were still trapped in a nightmare. I wanted to see my mother more than anything, to feel her comforting presence and know that I was safe. But when I opened my eyes, I was greeted not by her familiar face, but by the sheriff and Jake's father of all people, standing at the foot of my bed. The sheriff had a grave expression on his face, his eyes filled with concern. Beside him, Jake's father looked bored and weary, his usually stern demeanour softened by just a hint of sadness. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing that Jake had not made it out of the mountain alive, that he had been taken by those creatures, and that I had failed to protect him. The sheriff explained that he had found me near the town line, having rolled the stone over just in time before I passed out. They had brought me to the hospital, where the doctors had tended to my injuries. I was lucky to be alive, they said. Lucky to have escaped the mountain with my life. The sheriff's words weighed heavily on me. His tone was firm, his gaze unwavering, as he made it clear that what happened in the mountain must never be spoken of. He spoke of a pact, a secret that the town had kept for generations, and that it too was part of the ritual with the stone that was essential for the town's safety. He warned me of the consequences of breaking this silence, of the disaster that would befall the town if the truth were revealed. I knew that I could never speak of what I had seen, of the creatures that lurked in the darkness, of the horrors that had unfolded on that mountain. I nodded, my voice catching in my throat, as I promised to keep the secret, to protect the town and its people from whatever fate awaited them if the truth were ever known. The sheriff's eyes softened slightly, his expression sympathetic, as he assured me that I had done the right thing, that my silence was necessary for the greater good. Jake's father, however, did not look kindly upon me. His expression was made of stone. There was a glint behind his eyes that was anything but friendly. As promised, I was the talk of the town for having retrieved the stone, and the riches and rewards were mine to claim. A huge ceremony was held in the centre of town a week later, once I had recovered. The ceremony was a sombre affair, held in the town square under a sky tinged with the hues of the setting sun. As the townspeople gathered, I looked at the front of the little raised platform, my body still bearing the bruises and cuts from my ordeal on the mountain. The weight of my survival, of being the only one to return from the ritual, pressed down on me like a lead weight. The mayor spoke, praising my bravery and resilience in the face of danger. He presented me with a cheque for a substantial sum of money, my reward. The townspeople clapped politely, their faces a mix of admiration and pity. But despite the accolades and the award, my heart was heavy with grief. I thought of all the others who had ventured into the mountains with me, never to return. I thought of the creature that had taken Maya's form, of the horrors that had chased us all down in the darkness. As the ceremony drew to a close, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was the sheriff, his eyes grave. He thanked me for my silence, for keeping the town's secret. But beneath his words, I sensed a sadness, a weariness that spoke of years spent carrying the burden of that secret. As the crowd dispersed and the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood alone in that square, the weight of my survival heavier than ever. I knew I would never be the same. The events of that night had changed me in ways that I could never fully comprehend. I wandered through the familiar streets of town, my thoughts heavy with the memories of Maya and Jake. I made my way to our favourite spot by the river, a place we had often visited together to escape the hustle and bustle of town life. Sitting on the bank, I let my mind drift, remembering the laughter and camaraderie that we had shared in this very spot. Thinking of Jake, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. He was a good friend, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. I thought about his strained relationship with his father, how he longed to escape the confines of his family's expectations. It was a cruel twist of fate that he had never really gotten a chance to break free. And then there was Maya, with her adventurous spirit and quick wit. I thought about her clever use of the mirror to ward off the creature that had taken her form. It struck me then, with a sudden jolt of realization, like lightning coursing through my veins. I had never actually seen Maya die. She had disappeared, yes, but there was no definitive proof of her fate. Hope sparked within me, a flicker of possibility in the darkness of my grief. Could it be that Maya was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found? She was smart enough, clever enough to keep those creatures off of her. She had her mirror. The thought filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew that I had to find her, to search every inch of that mountain if I had to, until I had answers. I'm setting off tonight to find Maya, or die trying. I've armed myself with a half-dozen mirrors, and I've purchased a gun from old Mr. Telamahe. If I stay near the stream, everything should be okay. Sheriff Dearborn told me I couldn't speak about anything that happened on the mountain, and I haven't. That's why I'm leaving this journal instead. If I don't make it back, and you happen to find this, please, give this to my mother. She deserves to know what happened to me. Maya, I'm coming.